Hi, and welcome back to the Lil Will Learning Company. Today we're going to be learning about William Shakespeare, and well, he wrote a lot of plays, 37 that we know of, and they usually are categorized into histories, comedies, and tragedies. And usually, for the most part, he's probably more well known for his tragedies and for a handful of comedies as well. But often what I hear from many students is, well, Shakespeare is difficult, it's hard to teach, and no one understands it anymore. Now, as someone who taught Shakespeare to a lot of students for many, many years, I never quite understood that, I guess. Um, to me, Shakespeare was always fairly accessible. It did take a little bit longer to explain certain things, and I'll admit that when I did teach it to students, I'm not saying they understood 100% of it the first time through, but usually after many repeated listenings and viewings and speaking the lines over and over, they would begin to get a very good grasp on what the language was saying. And even for students who went to go see plays of Shakespeare's at Shakespeare festivals, they would get a very good grasp of the language and, for the most part, understand at least the tragedy or the humor of it. And that's all I want to focus on today. I want to focus on the play Much Ado About Nothing. And in the play, there is a hilarious character named Dogberry. And Dogberry is funny for several reasons. He's basically the constable. He is one of authority, the law in the area, and he's trying to help with catching suspicious people that's leading up to the wedding of Leonardo's daughter, Hero. And while he and his crew of men are keeping the watch, he tries to give his authority, but he gives it in a very clumsy way. Basically, he delivers his words very clumsily. And the joke behind it is he speaks in what's called malapropisms. And essentially, what a malapropism is, it's a real word that's being used, and it sounds like it's the right word used in that phrase, but it's the wrong word and it has a very different meaning from what the character was attempting to say. What makes it, well, really, really funny is the fact that when Dogberry delivers these lines, he delivers it with confidence and authority, not realizing that he said something that has a very different meaning from what he was trying to get across. Hence where the comedy comes in. We're going to look at a few examples of those malapropisms and just one more that's not a malapropism, but just shows the comedy of Shakespeare and the comedy of Dogberry. The first example from Dogberry is this. Our watch, sir, have indeed comprehended two auspicious persons. Now, he says comprehended two auspicious persons. He means to say apprehended two suspicious persons. Now, comprehend just means to understand something that you've read, but auspicious means something that's favorable or fortunate or someone who's promising a good outcome. So basically, he finds these, criminals, but he calls them auspicious, basically praising them when he meant to say suspicious, like they're up to no good, they're doing something bad. So again, we have indeed comprehended two auspicious persons. He meant to say apprehended two suspicious persons. Next example of a malapropism is when he says, comparisons are odorous. Now, what he means to say is comparisons are odious. Now, odorous simply means you have a smell, but he meant to say odious, meaning full, like it's hateful or it's offensive or it's repulsive. So the comparisons they're bad, they're repulsive, they're offensive. But he calls it odorous instead, meaning they're smelly. I guess they're kind of similar in some sense, but again, confidently saying one thing, but the words actually used have a different meaning. The third example, later on in the play, Dogberry asks everyone, is our whole dissembly here? Now, what he means to say is our whole assembly here? An assembly means a gathering of people, but dissembly means when someone hides their true motives or they're being deceptive. So, in a sense, when he's asking, is our whole dissembly here, he's essentially kind of insulting everyone in the room that is there. When he meant to say, is our whole assembly here, is everyone here gathered together. After they do apprehend the suspicious persons, he then goes on to say, "We are now to examination these men." Now, okay, what he means to say is, we are now to examine these men. Basically, to mean like to interrogate them, to ask them questions, to figure out what they were doing and all that. And examine is a verb, it's an action. But then he uses examination, which is the noun. So it's ever so close to what he was trying to say, just not quite grammatically correct. We are now to examination these men. Next one, where he says, after interrogating them, "O villain, thou shalt be condemned into everlasting redemption for this." He gets these two suspicious people to admit their crime and admit their guilt in something in the story. I don't want to ruin the story, but he gets them to admit their guilt. And he says, "Thou shalt be condemned into everlasting redemption for this." Now, he says it in a tone of like, "Oh, how could you? How dare you?" Because what he meant to say is, "Thou shalt be condemned into everlasting damnation for this," which means essentially to be condemned to punishment or to hell for this wrongdoing. But instead, he uses redemption, which means to be rescued, to be forgiven, to be given salvation, which is the complete opposite meaning of what he was trying to say to these two guilty people. Now, a little bit earlier on in the play, Dogberry is saying to the watch as they're about to look out for any suspicious people, he says, "This is your charge. You shall comprehend all vagrom men." Now, vagrom men just means like vagabonds or vagrants or people who live out on the street or maybe up to no good. And he says, "You shall comprehend all of them." Now, again, comprehend from earlier just means to understand something. But what he means to say is, "You shall apprehend all vagrom men," to literally take them into custody. And I mean, I guess both work in a way, to comprehend to understand them or to apprehend to bring them into custody, but he means to say apprehend. And one more malapropism where he says, "If you meet a thief, you may suspect him by virtue of your office." Well, what he's saying is you may suspect him by virtue of your office. And, you guys are the watch and you're allowed to go to this person. But he says suspect him. What he really means to say is to arrest him. And again, I guess both work. You can suspect someone and you could arrest them, but he means to say arrest. Hence, all these examples of malapropisms, it sounds correct when you hear it, and maybe you're not even paying attention, like, I guess he knows what he's saying, but if you look really closely at the words actually being spoken and the meanings behind them, you realize, well, that's not what he meant to say at all. Near the end of the play, I believe it's in Act 4, maybe no, maybe it's the beginning of Act 5, he then presents these two auspicious persons to Leonardo, and he basically says to him, here's what they're guilty of, here's what they've done. And essentially they have created a lie that all the other characters believe in, which has ruined which leads to the kind of ruination of one of the other characters in the story. And he has to explain this to Leonardo. Now, all he really has to say is, yeah, these are the two people who created the lie, the thing that's not true. But he says it like this: "Marry, sir, they have committed false report. Moreover, they have spoken untruths. Secondarily, they are slanders. Sixth and lastly, they have belied a lady. Thirdly, they have verified unjust things. And to conclude, they are lying knaves." Now, I want to go over the order of what he says things. Now, when we say things in order, we go first, second, third, fourth, in that order, or we go first, and then this, next, so on and so forth. There's a progression when we say things, but he says it in this way. He says, the first thing, they committed false report. Then he says, moreover, they do the next thing. Secondarily. Now, he uses secondarily as his third point. For his fourth point, he goes, sixth and lastly. Now, it's not even the last thing he says anyway, but the fact is that he says the fourth thing is the sixth thing and lastly. Then, for the fifth one, he says, thirdly. But at least he does for the last thing he does say, he says, "and to conclude." So that part is correct. So he can't even get the chronological order of it correctly. But then here's what he says for each one. They have committed false reports. They have spoken untruths. They are slanders. They have belied a lady. They have verified unjust things. And they are lying knaves. And essentially for all of them, it's just, yeah, they're liars. They're liars. Oh, also, they are liars. Did I also mention they're lying? And also, by the way, they've lied. Basically, he finds so many different ways to essentially just say that these two men are liars, are the ones who have created the lie, which sets forth the whole story, which is also why it's called Much Ado About Nothing. It's not that Dogberry lacks the words, he lacks control of how to use those words correctly. But he's a hilarious character. If you've never seen Much Ado About Nothing, I highly recommend it. And of course, with any of Shakespeare's plays, when you see it, there's movie versions which are really good. I've always liked the Kenneth Branagh version. Um, I like the Joss Whedon version as well, but when you see it live, every live production is slightly different from the others, but I've always been really impressed by this play. It's probably my favorite comedy by William Shakespeare. Well, I hope you also liked Shakespeare, and I hope you really enjoy the character of Dogberry and the wonderful play Much Ado. Please like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next video. And until next time, take care.